Hello, welcome to The Road to Tokyo. I'm Tracey Holmes. Coming up, we'll hear of the extraordinary rescue mission that saved 50 athletes, including 2 Paralympians, from the devastation that's occurring in Afghanistan. We'll hear how a group of Australian athletes and human rights lawyers from around the world banded together to mount the rescue operation. First, though, the Paralympic Games are in fact underway. Australia is already off to a winning start, taking home 6 gold medals in the pool on just the opening day. A year later than scheduled and without spectators, the Games look vastly different for the roughly 4,000 Paralympians taking part. As the athletes filed into the stadium at the opening ceremony, a show of solidarity for the 2 Afghan Paralympians who couldn't be there, with a Tokyo volunteer carrying Afghanistan's flag. Afghanistan's 2 Paralympians, Zakia Kudadadi and Hussein Rassouli, had hoped to be at their first opening ceremony. The pair became trapped in the country when the Taliban took over last week. Their calls for help were heard by a group of Australian athletes who carried out a painstakingly difficult mission to get them out of Afghanistan, along with more than 50 other athletes. Just days ago, Zakia Kudadadi thought her dreams of becoming Afghanistan's first female Paralympian were over. As Kabul descended into chaos, the Taekwondo athlete was left stranded outside the airport, her commercial flight to Tokyo cancelled. Scared for her safety, she issued this plea to the outside world.
I request from you all that I'm an Afghan woman, and as a representative of Afghan women, I ask you to help me.
That plea has now been answered. Zakia Kudadadi is one of around 50 Afghan athletes who've been airlifted out of Kabul by the Australian Defence Force. This is her with fellow Afghan Paralympian Hussein Rassouli being helped through Hamid Karzai Airport by French and British soldiers. At one point, they got separated from the rest of the athletes but managed to connect with the ADF in time. Planning for the Mercy mission started last Wednesday when a human rights lawyer, Olympian Nikki Dryden, drew up a list of at-risk athletes and pulled an expert team together. Former Socceroo captain and refugee advocate Craig Foster got involved, as did Australian Paralympic champion Kurt Fearnley. Within 3 days, the Australian government had committed to accept all the athletes, granting them humanitarian visas. Nikki Dryden said it was an incredible effort to get these athletes to safety.
We had, lists of athletes, football players, there were referees, and there were Paralympians on this list and their families. So that's the bulk of the ones that we were working with. I was actually working on another human rights project earlier in the week, and I just hadn't even thought about Afghanistan. And then all of a sudden I realized nobody else was thinking the way I was thinking. And I sent a text to Craig and I said, who do we know in the Australian government? At the beginning, I was the most worried about getting them to the airport, and we had all these contingency plans. I mean, the number of people that have had experiences, so you mentioned Alison Battison, who's a lawyer for Human Rights for All. Between her and myself and another human rights lawyer in London, we'd all had experiences working in developing countries, war zones, being in tragedies and things, natural disasters. And so we knew a lot of secrets, and we were trying to talk the athletes through how to get through the Taliban checkpoints to get to the airport. That wasn't the problem. So they all arrived at the airport quicker than we thought. And the real problem was getting them inside the airport. And so I just want to be really clear. I mean, they spent the first 24 hours at the airport in lines, thousands of people, and nothing happened. And they were getting very angry, upset, devastated. A lot of women were sleeping in the airport, slept rough outside the first night. They were mugged, they were touched, they were exhausted, and that was only not even halfway. There was moments when we had them all together. There were moments when they got separated. I mean, there were crowds of thousands, and you're right, we were moving them from, everyone's like, go to the North Gate. Well, guess what? There was an A, B, and C at the North Gate. And then when we moved them to the South Gate, there was an Abbey Gate. And then there was, the levels of checkpoints. I mean, we were trying to orchestrate this from Australia and London. I think that is insane. We didn't know what was on the ground, the number of GPS maps and pin drops. And it was constant. And I think, the thing I really want to stress, and I think, which is what makes immigrants and refugees so extraordinary, is that they were calling for help for days and nobody came out to get them. Okay. We had people from 5 different governments saying maybe they could try to come out. But the policy is that foreign governments were not allowed to leave the airport. And that did not happen. The desperate calls for help, the text messages and the voicemails we were getting, come send somebody out to get us. We've been in this line for 48 hours. What happened was that they all made it to the front of the gate themselves. The only thing we could keep telling them was push forward, push forward, push forward, stay in the line, don't move. And they did it. Every single one of them that is going to make it to Australia did it on their own. And that's what's so extraordinary about the refugee story. And I really want everybody to know that yes, we gave them a hand, but they did it on their own. And I could not get them to the gate. I could not get anyone to save them. They saved themselves.
With only days to go until Paralympian Janine Watson takes part in the Taekwondo competition, her preparation has hit a massive hurdle.
So the joys of being an athlete with a disability, it's less than 1 week until I fly out to Tokyo, and my MS, as unpredictable as it is, has decided that it would like to throw a spanner in the works, and for the last couple of days I have been completely bedridden and unable to even stand or walk. That means that my last lot of training sessions haven't happened. I'm not focusing on the what ifs whatsoever, just focusing on rest and recovery. I know that it will be perfectly okay, and what will happen will happen. So while I've been in bed for most of the time, I've got little Boots here who he's been keeping me company, and still positive, still grateful, and we'll be flying out very soon to compete at the Tokyo Games. So from me and from Boots, have a wonderful day, and hopefully I'll be seeing everyone soon.
Ahmed Kelly is competing in his 3rd Paralympic Games and hopes to return to Australia with a gold medal. He joined us on Road to Tokyo earlier in the year, along with his friend and hero, Grant Scooter Patterson.
We had a lot of time off the pool, but I know that everybody was in the same boat, and a lot of them had different challenges as well. So for me, as soon as I got back in the pool, it was more about getting the feel again. I mean, the goal is to finish top 3, but again, to really work on our process, really try and control the things that we're able to, and hopefully the outcome will sort itself out.
Ahmed and brother Emmanuel were living in an orphanage in Baghdad in 1998 when they met humanitarian worker Moira Kelly. Both the boys had very underdeveloped arms and legs caused by exposure to chemical weapons. Moira adopted the pair and brought them back to Australia. She's normally poolside to see Ahmed compete, but these games she's cheering him on from their home in Melbourne. I caught up with Moira after Ahmed's first race.
We're screaming and yelling, just seeing him come out and they talk about mention his name. It was just like, because of the first Olympics I haven't been to, I've gone to every other Paris for him, you see. So, yeah, it was just one of those wonderful electrical moments. And you just, sometimes you get used to having a child who's in your family who's just doing all these sports things. And it's moments like that you realise, oh, wow, this is pretty big. So it was absolutely ecstatic.
In your situation, when you adopted the boys and then twin girls later, what sort of role did sport play in their development, and how important is that going to be for these women coming from Afghanistan?
There's these journeys like this, they put a face to a war and they're human stories. And so seeing young people who are just doing sports no different to our kids, and suddenly they're coming from a completely different version, like even Ahmed and Manuel, I mean, they came from the Baghdad war. So I think it puts a face on the human side of war, and also that they just want to do things that we do as well. So, yes, I think it instills, I suppose, mankind sticking together, and it doesn't matter what passport you own, you're still your life is still as sacred as ours.
You talk about that sort of confidence building and what that does for a person, how it allows them to really expand to their fullest self.
Yes.
Is that part of the beauty of
Oh,
sport?
I think so. I've seen him grow, but I've also seen him mature, but also suddenly the sport's not, because swimming can be a very lonely sport because you're up and down that pool, but it really is about a team. So I think team sports for people like kids like Ahmed, my experience has been, it's certainly been something he's valued as a team and made friends, and it's not just about yourself like a football team. But for people looking outside in, I think we'll always be in awe, whether it's cool or not, because you think they're achieving phenomenal things that some of us can't even get off our chairs and do. And they do it with such jest and happiness. They seem to love what they do, and that's a lot to do with it as well. So, yeah, I think we as able-bodied people sort of look up to them, admire what they achieve, and also have a great respect for them. And he's certainly taught me that, and I've seen those values in Ahmed, and sport has brought that to Ahmed.
Yeah. What does he mean to you?
Oh, he's my whole life. He's my little man. So he's the man of the house. He's the oldest in the family. So, yeah, he's always Ahmed's. I always describe Ahmed as an old soul. He's like he's been here before, even as a young person. You know, when I was in Iraq, that time meeting the boys for the first time, and I spent a week with them in Baghdad. It was during the time of Saddam Hussein, so things were a bit dicey at that time. And I'd come by taxi from Jordan, but I had a week with them. And before I used to leave them, I got a taxi back to Jordan. I remember Ahmed coming up with his broken English and had a translator. And he said to me, Moira, he said, Auntie Moira, are you coming back? I said, well, I'm definitely going to come back and let you know what's going to happen. So what, are you going to take us to that country, Australia? And I said, look, I'm not going to make any false promises, but I've got butterflies, and that's a good place to start. So then he said, I said, it's up to the doctors in Australia if we think they can help. But I'll never forget the thing he said to me. He said, well, Auntie Moira, why don't you just take my brother Emmanuel now and come back and get me another time? And it's one of those things I've just never forgotten. And that's, you know, you can't teach that.
No.
So Ahmed, it's one of those things that stuck with me all my life, was that, and there's not a person in the world that wouldn't have come back and fought for the two of them. I just happen to be the lucky one. So yeah, so that's who Ahmed is really. But he's a bit of a quiet achiever.
The story of Paralympian Alberto Campbell is, like many others, one of overcoming adversity time and time again, including qualifying for the Rio Paralympic Games and then missing out on a technicality.
Preparing to finally call himself a Paralympian, Alberto Campbell will race the 400 metres in Tokyo. It's a long way from his training track in Brisbane, and after years of running for Australia, this time he's wearing a different green and gold uniform.
Hearing that good news, I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome experience representing my birth country.
Alberto's journey began in a Jamaican orphanage. He was born 3 months premature, abandoned at birth and malnourished, leaving him with an intellectual disability. He captured the hearts of Brisbane's school teachers, Julianne and Paul Staines. They not only became his adopted parents, but his cheer squad from the first time they saw him run.
We said, just try to keep up with your friends and have a good time, and it doesn't matter. And then he ran and won. And won convincingly, and the PE teacher came up to us and just quietly said, I think we might have to get this lad some training.
It wasn't long before Alberto represented Australia as a dual citizen. In 2016, he was on the Paralympic team heading to Rio.
I get to try on the gear, promote the game, get an interview, and then unfortunately a few weeks later they had to cut half of the team, and I was one of those who got cut from the team.
But it didn't stop Alberto from training, and it was actually an Australian coach who saw his potential and a unique possibility.
Why don't you contact Jamaica and see if there's a chance for him representing Jamaica in the Paralympics?
With a position vacant in his classification, it was the perfect fit, and actually an Australian official who made sure Alberto could represent a different country.
He actually said to me, he said, he's competing for Jamaica, but he'll always be an Australian. And it just shows what a fantastic community that the athletics community is.
While Alberto will run for his birth country in Tokyo, he knows his adopted nation is also behind him.
Australia has been so good to me in the past, and I'm sure they will continue to support me no matter what happens.
That's all on this week's edition of Road to Tokyo. See you next time.